Hello and welcome to the Synte Language channel. The main purpose of this channel serves as an introduction to the Synte language, as you might have gathered. And this is a new live coding language and an implementation that is synthesis based with a few bells and whistles and whatnot. It's designed for live performance and kind of typical live coding activities. So what I'm going to do first is just dive in and start making some sounds, and so you don't just get bored of me droning on, and then I'll go into more detail about what is involved in writing code for Synte, what the possibilities are and stuff. Okay, so here we go. And one other thing I should say is that the format I've chosen for these videos is kind of as if it's live streamed, so it's not going to be edited unless, you know, there's some kind of crazy loud noise that I need to take out or something from my immediate environment. So I'll probably leave that in. But suffice to say, it's not supposed to be a polished video presentation. It's for anyone who's not come across this to well, learn more about it. Now, I should say that part of the purpose of making these videos is to explore the language myself. I've been working on this code for a while, but I've not actually had a lot of opportunities to play around with it. And part of the reason for that is because it's kind of hard to perform without an audience. So you make different decisions, you react differently, you're just kind of messing around to having an audience, or at least a perceived audience. So this is kind of like the next stage in testing the language. I've done a lot of testing so far, but I really want to kind of like play around with it. So what you've just seen there is a series of alternating notes that were spanning like an octave jump at different root frequencies that were kind of related. So you might have noticed that none of those were actually synchronized in time. I'll introduce synchronization later on, which enables you to kind of lock different listings in time with each other. But you can see that in the main window there, I hope that's not flickering too much for you in the recording. It's a bit of a limitation for the kind of hacky way I've done the UI at the moment. But there's like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 are the indexes of different listings. 3 and 4 don't actually produce any sound. They're just controlling the level of 0 and 1 and use that to like fade them out. 2 you can see is grayed out in italics. That's because it's muted. So if I now do mute 2, I'll unmute it. Now 0 and 1 haven't been muted, but the actual level has been taken down to 0. So in order to, so there's 2 ways of controlling volume. You can either mute or unmute a listing, or you can control its level. So in order to bring them back into play, if I wanted to do it suddenly, then let's see if I get this right. I can do that, or I can do the opposite of what I just did. Instead of flipping the waveform produced by once, which is something, once keyword means it, or operator means it ramps up and then stays at a certain level. So that's exactly what this will do. And then if I do level of 1, over 20 seconds, 1 will increase in level. You can hear it coming in now. Now these level control listings, you can delete them after you've finished with them, and the level will maintain its previous state. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'll briefly pause. So let's go into a bit more detail about how exactly I'm constructing these sounds. So each of the magenta or purple words on the listings display is an operator, and the operator takes an input from the previous operation, does something to it, and passes it on. So it's a bit like functional programming, where you apply a function to something, get a result, and then you apply a function to that, etc. So in means that you can put a number into Synte to like control something. Divide, it's fairly self-explanatory, and mul is multiply. And then pulse and slew are a bit different. They're actually functions, so they're like a grouping of other operators that have been pulled together into an abstraction. And a lot of Synte is based on functions, otherwise it would get very complicated and very wordy very quickly. So another purpose of this kind of explorations that I'm doing in these videos, which hopefully will be a series, is to develop and explore and kind of bootstrap these abstractions, because in a sense the language is only half finished until it's got this kind of bigger ecosystem that makes it, you know, more straightforward to use, more direct. Otherwise it really would feel like you're programming in assembly or something, which, although very fun, is can be quite frustrating and take a long time. So just to go through some more of the operators that you can see on the screen. Base means that you raise 2 to the power of the input, which is how we get our octave jump. So we're going from 1 to 2 to the power of 1, which is 2, which is an octave. Osc is another function, and that kind of takes in its input and just adds it to itself repeatedly. But it doesn't just kind of like keep on increasing to infinity. When it gets to a certain value, which is 1, then it loops back around and starts from 0 again and keeps on counting up. And this is a really crucial function, and I haven't really decided yet, but it's pretty much essential in nearly all listings that are going to produce a sound, because from you think that might be restrictive, but from the output of that you can shape it into anything you want, because it's a linear ramp. The documentation goes into more detail on this, but so for instance it's counting from 0 to 1. That's fed into the sine operator, which kind of does what you'd expect, computes a sine function, although it is like an actual operator built into the language. It's not reducible into any component parts. So that shapes this ramp into a sine wave, and then it gets sent to the mix function, which is a very simple function that just ends the current listing, launches it to the sound engine, and it also kind of sets a sensible level for the sound. And to make it easier for you to kind of just fire off these little listings without worrying too much about how loud they're going to be or anything. Now, if you do accidentally do something that's really loud and really kind of dominates the mix, there is a built-in limiter, and limiter is like progressively more sensitive to higher frequencies, so it kind of matches the spectral density that our ears expect to hear to a kind of fairly decent approximation. Basically, it's there as a kind of end stop to make sure that you don't blast out a full scale like 2 kilohertz sine wave. And the reason why you wouldn't want to do that is because if you're listening, the ear is it's got a very different sensitivity to different frequencies. And so it's much less sensitive to very low frequency like bass sound, which tend to be like very close to full scale. Full scale means like the loudest it can be. Whereas in nearly all recorded music, as you go up in frequency, the amplitude or the loudness of a particular frequency tails off dramatically. So something at 2000 hertz, 2 kilohertz, which is, you know, well into the treble range, will generally be a lot more greatly attenuated at a much lower volume than your bass sounds. And so Synte kind of follows this expected format. So to avoid the possibility of any kind of loud bursts of sound. And this has been like designed in from the very outset. Program that I used to play around with a lot. It's called Pure Data, which is a lot of fun. But there's certain limitations with it where you can kind of end up blasting your speakers, where you've accidentally clipped something, I introduced like massive distortion, and the sound can kind of seem to suddenly jump up in volume. Now, technically speaking, it's not louder than any other sound in terms of like how it's the actual data. But like I said, because our ears are much more sensitive to higher frequencies, it really jumps out at you and it can actually be quite painful. So I was aware of this kind of possibility, and that and a few other reasons and previous experience in sound engineering and stuff, you know, made that one of the core things that I considered from the beginning. So I think I'm going to end this recording now and save up some things for future videos. Is there anything concluding that I want to do? Let's end out with some relaxing surf sounds. Remember how to do this. So I don't know if you heard, but like everything started back up again. Like immediately I submitted that, it took it out of pause because, you know, it says play resume. So, but let's solo that noise. I did make a mistake there. So oops. Well, due to the extreme pressure of performing to an empty room and possibly an empty YouTube audience, ultimately I've forgotten how to make surf sounds. Now I could go back to the documentation because it's listed in there as one of the examples, but I think I'll just, put it down to experience. So to close out, I'll just briefly say why I've been doing this. Now the main reason is fun. I just learnt this new to me language called Go, and I love making synths and stuff, so it was a kind of logical thing. And when I kind of looked back, it seemed like the culmination of a lot of stuff I've done over the last decade or so. And also I've been to quite a few live coding events, which are a lot of fun and really exciting, and really feel like there's some really good future possibilities there too. It's like an open thing. So I wanted to take the opportunity to add to this ecosystem and expand it even further by giving possibilities that weren't necessarily easy accessible before. And that's not to knock any of the other really good live coding languages out there. It's purely a case of well, I'd like it to do this, and we'll see if that has a wider appeal as well. And I pretty much am in reinventing the wheel. It's not a highly original thing. Conceptually, it's similar to other ways of doing audio synthesis, such as using pure data or modular synthesis, any kind of analog synthesis. It's not a kind of radical invention or anything like that. It's purely a kind of set of features that I wanted to have arranged in a fairly sensible manner, enabling people to do some quite cool things that you'll see in future videos, especially when we get onto things like sampling and things like that. So I'm going to end this recording here. Hope you found that interesting, and this is my moment to say, please subscribe and leave a comment below, but do what you want. But thanks for listening. Okay, bye.